7 people died in 73 seconds because someone wanted to save money on rubber rings. This isn't just another space disaster story. This is about how NASA knowingly sent astronauts to their deaths and then lied about it for decades. By the end of this video, you'll discover evidence that will make you question everything you thought you knew about the Challenger explosion. And trust me, the truth is far worse than what they showed you on TV. I'm about to reveal classified details that NASA tried to hide, including proof that the crew was alive and conscious during their 3-minute fall to Earth. But first, hit that subscribe button because what I'm about to tell you will change how you see space exploration forever. And make sure you watch until the very end, because I'll show you recent underwater discoveries that prove NASA has been covering up evidence for almost 40 years. Let's go back to 1972. America just put men on the moon, but nobody cared anymore. The excitement was gone. People were bored with space. Congress started cutting NASA's budget like crazy. NASA was desperate. They needed something big, something that would make people care about space again. So they came up with a brilliant idea: build a space truck that could fly over and over again. They promised it would be cheap, safe, and fly every 2 weeks. They called it the Space Shuttle. But here's the first lie: it was never going to be cheap or safe. From day one, NASA knew they were building a death trap, but they needed the money to survive. Politicians loved the idea because it sounded amazing. Military leaders loved it because they could use it for secret missions. Everyone was happy except the engineers who actually had to build this thing. The engineers wanted to use liquid fuel rockets. These were safe because you could turn them off if something went wrong. But liquid rockets cost too much money. So NASA was forced to use solid rocket boosters instead. Think of these like giant fireworks. Once you light them, they burn until they're done. You can't stop them. You can't slow them down. If something goes wrong, you're dead. Morton Thiokol got the contract to build these solid rockets. But there was a huge problem. The rockets were so big they couldn't be built in one piece. They had to be made in sections, like stacking giant cans on top of each other. Between each section, they put rubber rings called O-rings to keep the hot gas from leaking out. These rubber rings were the only thing standing between the astronauts and death. Here's where it gets crazy. The very first shuttle flight in 1981 came back with burned O-rings. The rubber was damaged. NASA looked at this and said, "Well, the shuttle didn't explode, so I guess it's fine." This was the beginning of the end. Instead of fixing the problem, they just accepted it as normal. Flight after flight, the O-rings kept getting damaged. Engineers found black soot where it shouldn't be. They found burn marks. They found evidence that the primary O-rings were failing and only the backup rings saved the crew. But instead of grounding the shuttles, NASA just kept flying. They created a new phrase: acceptable risk. Every time something went wrong that didn't kill anyone, they called it acceptable risk. There was one engineer who refused to stay quiet. His name was Roger Boisjoli. In 1984, he wrote a memo that should have ended the shuttle program. He said clearly that if they didn't fix the O-ring problem, people would die. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't being dramatic. He was stating a fact based on the evidence. NASA read his memo and then buried it. The culture at NASA had completely changed. During the Apollo program, if even one engineer had a safety concern, they would stop everything until it was fixed. But by the 1980s, engineers who raised safety issues were seen as troublemakers. They were told to be team players. They were told they didn't understand the big picture. The message was clear: shut up and keep the shuttles flying. William Lucas was the director of Marshall Space Flight Center. And he created this toxic culture. He didn't want to hear bad news. He didn't want problems. He wanted schedules met and budgets balanced. Under his leadership, safety concerns were filtered out before they reached the people making decisions. When engineers tried to speak up, they were silenced. By 1986, NASA was under enormous pressure. They had promised to fly shuttles every 2 weeks. But they were way behind schedule. Politicians were getting angry. The media was asking tough questions. NASA needed a perfect flight to prove the shuttle program worked. That's when they decided to put a teacher in space. Christa McAuliffe wasn't just any teacher. She was America's teacher, chosen from thousands of applicants. Her mission was going to be broadcast live to schools across the country. Kids would watch her teach lessons from space. It was brilliant marketing, but it also meant the whole world would be watching. There was no room for delays or problems. Then winter hit Florida hard. January 27, 1986, was freezing cold. Ice covered the launch pad. The engineers at Morton Thiokol were terrified because they knew something NASA didn't want to admit. O-rings don't work when it's cold. The rubber becomes hard and brittle. It can't seal properly. They had data proving this. The night before the launch, Thiokol engineers held an emergency meeting. They recommended canceling the launch. They showed charts and graphs proving the O-rings would fail in cold weather. They begged NASA to wait for warmer weather. But NASA managers weren't interested in data. They were interested in keeping their jobs and meeting their deadlines. NASA pushed back hard. They questioned every piece of data. They challenged every conclusion. They made it clear that anyone who delayed this launch would be blamed for embarrassing NASA in front of the whole world. Under this pressure, Thiokol management caved. They overruled their own engineers and said it was okay to launch. Alan McDonald was the Thiokol engineer who was supposed to sign the launch approval. He refused. He said he wouldn't want to explain to dead astronauts' families why he approved a launch he knew was dangerous. NASA ignored him and found someone else to sign. On the morning of January 28, they knew what was about to happen, but they were powerless to stop it. At 11:39 a.m., Challenger lifted off with 7 people who had no idea they were riding a bomb. For 73 seconds, everything looked normal on TV. The shuttle climbed into the bright blue sky. The crew was probably excited, looking forward to their week in space. Then at 48,000 feet, the inevitable happened. The cold O-rings failed exactly as the engineers predicted. Hot gas shot out like a blowtorch and hit the main fuel tank. Here's what most people don't know. Challenger didn't explode. It broke apart. The crew compartment where the 7 astronauts were sitting, separated from the rest of the shuttle intact. This is important because it means the crew didn't die in the breakup. They were still alive. For the next 2 minutes and 45 seconds, the crew compartment fell 65,000 feet toward the ocean. Recent evidence proves that at least some of the crew was conscious during this fall. How do we know? 3 of the 4 emergency air packs were manually turned on. Only a conscious person can do that. Switches in the cockpit were moved after the breakup. The crew knew they were falling to their deaths. Think about that for a moment. These 7 people sat in that cabin for almost 3 minutes, knowing they were going to die, unable to do anything about it. They didn't die in a quick explosion like NASA let everyone believe. They died when the crew compartment hit the ocean at over 200 miles per hour. NASA knew this from the beginning, but they hid it from the families and the public for years. They let everyone believe the crew died instantly and painlessly. The truth was much more horrible, and it made NASA look even worse, because it proved how completely preventable this disaster was. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of NASA's failure. Engineers had been warning about O-ring problems for years. There had been multiple close calls that NASA ignored. Every successful flight with O-ring damage should have been seen as a warning, but NASA saw it as proof the system worked. William Lucas, the man who created the culture that killed the Challenger crew, never faced real consequences. He retired quietly and lived comfortably, until his. Meanwhile, the families of the 7 astronauts had to live with the knowledge that their loved ones died because someone wanted to save money and meet a deadline. But the story doesn't end there. In 2022, documentary filmmakers accidentally discovered a 20-foot section of Challenger on the ocean floor. After nearly 40 years underwater, parts of the shuttle were still intact, preserved in the cold, dark depths of the Atlantic. The discovery reminded everyone that some evidence of NASA's failures is still out there, waiting to be found. New research continues to reveal how close NASA came to disaster on previous flights. Adam Higginbotham's 2024 book showed that the shuttle program had been incredibly lucky for years. Multiple flights came close to catastrophic failure, but luck isn't a safety system. Eventually luck runs out, and when it did, 7 people paid the price. The most disturbing part of this story isn't the technical failure. It's the human failure. Good people made bad decisions because they were under pressure to meet deadlines and budgets. Engineers who tried to do the right thing were silenced. Warnings were ignored. Evidence was buried. The very system designed to keep astronauts safe became the mechanism of their destruction. Today, NASA operates under strict safety protocols that came from the Challenger disaster. Every launch can be delayed for safety reasons without question. Engineers are encouraged to speak up about problems. Independent safety boards review every decision. These changes exist because 7 people died unnecessarily in 9 times. But we can't let these lessons be forgotten.
As we plan missions to Mars and beyond, we must remember that the biggest threat to astronaut safety isn't the danger of space, it's the human tendency to take shortcuts, ignore warnings, and prioritize schedules over safety. The Challenger crew trusted NASA to keep them safe, and NASA failed them completely. The 7 people who died on Challenger weren't heroes who died pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. They were victims of institutional failure, political pressure, and corporate greed. Their deaths were entirely preventable, which makes them not tragic accidents, but inexcusable murder. Roger Scobie, Michael Smith, Ronald McNair, Ellison Onizuka, Judith Resnick, Gregory Jarvis, and Krista McAuliffe died because people in suits cared more about money and schedules than human lives. Their real memorial isn't the schools and monuments named after them. It's every launch that gets delayed for safety, every engineer's concern that gets taken seriously, and every decision that puts crew safety first. But only if we remember the lessons of their deaths, and never let the same institutional failures happen again. The next time you see a rocket launch, remember that the greatest achievement isn't reaching space, it's bringing everyone home safely, and remember that the biggest enemy of space exploration isn't the vacuum of space, or radiation or mechanical failure, it's human arrogance, institutional pressure, and the deadly assumption that past success guarantees future safety. The Challenger disaster proves that when we forget these lessons, people die, and their deaths are on all of